You are lying in bed. The house is quiet. The clock on the nightstand says it is well past midnight. Your body is tired. Your eyes are heavy. And yet sleep will not come. Your feet are cold. You pull the blanket tighter. You turn over. Nothing. Here is what I found, and it stopped me cold. The reason so many of us lie awake at night has almost nothing to do with our busy minds. It has to do with our feet. And there is a forgotten way to warm them that can cut the time it takes you to fall asleep nearly in half. I did not believe that either. Not at first. But something happened one winter night that I could not explain, and I refused to let it go until I understood it. Here is what I will show you. The answer sits inside a laboratory study published in 1999 in one of the oldest scientific journals in the world. It had been sitting there in plain sight for more than 20 years while the rest of us tossed and turned. And the beauty of it is this: you do not need money, you do not need to be strong, and you do not need to leave the bed you already own. Let me take you back to where this started. It was February. My old house gets bone cold at night, the kind of cold that settles into the floorboards. I was staying in my late mother's spare room, sorting through boxes, when I found a heavy wool sock at the bottom of a trunk. Not a sock for wearing. A sock for a brick. My grandmother used to heat a flat brick by the stove every evening, wrap it in that wool, and slide it down to the foot of the bed before anyone climbed in. I had not thought about that brick in 50 years. And standing there in that freezing room, holding that old wool sock, one question landed on me and would not leave. Why did she warm our feet and not the rest of the bed? Think about it. If you are cold, the sensible thing is to warm your whole body. Warm the middle, where your heart is. Warm your back. But she never did that. Every single night, without fail, the warmth went to the very bottom of the bed, to our feet, the part of us furthest from everything important. It made no sense to me. It seemed almost backward. So that night, half out of stubbornness and half out of missing her, I filled an old rubber bottle with hot water and put it down by my feet, and I fell asleep before I could even finish being annoyed about it. That was the loose thread, and once I pulled it, the whole thing started to unravel in the best way, because the next morning I asked myself the obvious question. Was that luck? Was I just tired? Or did my grandmother and her mother before her know something the rest of us have quietly forgotten? I have spent a good part of my life being talked down to about my own health, sold pills and gadgets and special pillows, told my sleep problems were just part of getting old. Something in me did not accept that. So I started digging the way I dig into anything that does not add up. And what I found was that this was not a family superstition at all. This was known. This was written down. And somewhere along the way, it got buried under a mountain of things that cost money. Let me show you the first clue I uncovered, because it turned my little hunch into something much bigger. I started reading old household manuals, the thick ones our grandmothers actually used to run a home. And warming the bed was not a casual comfort in those books. It was treated as a matter of health. Back in the 1700s and 1800s, nearly every household that could afford one owned a bed warmer, a long-handled brass pan filled with hot coals or embers that you ran between the sheets. The wealthy had them made of copper and brass. The poor used a heated stone, or a brick like my grandmother's, or a flat iron wrapped in flannel. Now here is the part that made me sit up. Those old texts kept insisting that the warming should reach the feet. Not the shoulders, not the chest. The feet. One domestic guide I found from the 1860s gave very particular instructions about warming the lower part of the bed so that, and I am paraphrasing the old language, the sleeper's extremities are brought to comfort, upon which rest follows quickly. Rest follows quickly. There it was again. The exact same claim more than 150 years before I stumbled onto it with a rubber bottle in a freezing room. But I still did not know why. A tradition that old tells you something is true. It does not tell you how it works. And I needed how, because without the how, it is just an old wives' tale, and I have been burned by those before. So I kept pulling the thread. And this is where the story turns, because this is where I discovered who benefits from all of us forgetting. Think for a moment about what happened to the bed warmer. It vanished, not because it stopped working. It worked perfectly. It vanished because somewhere in the last century we were slowly taught that comfort is something you purchase and plug in. The heated mattress pad, the electric blanket with 9 settings, the expensive smart bed that adjusts its temperature and sends the bill to your door every month. We were sold the idea that a good night's sleep is a product, and every year that product costs more. And meanwhile, the simplest, cheapest, most reliable trick of all, the one that worked for 200 years, got quietly pushed to the back of the closet next to the brass pan nobody remembers how to use. I am not saying anyone gathered in a room and plotted this. I am saying that when the answer is free, nobody spends money to remind you it exists. And that, I have learned the hard way, is exactly how the most useful knowledge gets buried, not with a lock, with silence. That made me angry, honestly, because I have spent money I did not have on sleep aids that did nothing. And the whole time the answer was a warm spot at the foot of my bed, the same answer my grandmother had for free. But anger is not proof. I still needed the record. I needed the document that explained the mechanism, the one that would turn my grandmother's habit into something I could hand to you with a straight face. And that hunt took me somewhere I never expected. It took me into a sleep laboratory in Switzerland. Before I open that door, though, I have to tell you about the next clue, because it deepened the mystery instead of solving it. As I read more, I found something strange in the science of body temperature. It turns out your body does not simply fall asleep because it is tired. Your body falls asleep in part when its core temperature drops. Your inner thermostat has to cool down for sleep to begin. That felt completely backward to me at first. If cooling the body brings on sleep, then why on earth would warming the feet help? Warming should make you hotter, not cooler. It seemed to break the whole thing wide open. I sat with that contradiction for days. Warm feet but a cooler core. How could both be true at the same time? It felt like the record was almost taunting me. Every answer I found opened a bigger question, and the stakes kept climbing, because I was starting to realize how many nights of my life I had wasted, how many hours staring at that ceiling, and how many other people my age were doing the exact same thing at that very moment, blaming their age, blaming their minds, when the real answer was hiding in a paradox about temperature. So let me hand you the piece that finally cracked it open, because when it clicked, I actually laughed out loud in my kitchen. The answer is your blood. Your feet and your hands are full of special blood vessels that sit very close to the surface of the skin. Think of them like little radiators. When you warm your feet, those vessels open wide, and the warm blood rushes to the surface and releases heat out of your body. By warming the outside of your feet, you actually help your core dump its heat. Your center cools down, precisely because your feet warmed up. The warmth at your feet is not fighting the cooling. The warmth at your feet is what causes the cooling. That is the secret my grandmother never could have explained, but somehow always knew. She warmed our feet, and that opened the radiators in our skin, and our tired little bodies released their heat and cooled down at the center, and sleep followed just like the old book promised. Rest follows quickly. Now I finally understood the machinery behind those words. And once I understood it, I could not stop noticing how perfectly it explained the misery of a cold night. When your feet are freezing, those vessels clamp shut. They close up tight to protect you from the cold. And when they are closed, your body cannot release its heat properly. Your core stays a touch too warm inside, and your thermostat never gets the signal that it is time to sleep. That is why you lie there exhausted with cold feet and a restless mind. It is not in your head, it is in your feet. Cold feet are literally holding the door to sleep shut. I want you to sit with that, because it rewrites so many bad nights. Every time you have blamed yourself for not being able to shut your brain off, when maybe your brain was fine and your feet were the problem all along. But I promised you a buried record, a real one, with a date and a place, and I do not want you taking my word for any of this. So here is where the investigation reaches the door I told you about. Now, before I walk you through that door, I need to stop and talk to one particular person watching this. Maybe that is you. Maybe you are on a tight, fixed income, counting every dollar to the end of the month. Maybe your knees or your hips or your hands do not work the way they used to, and you are already thinking, this sounds nice, but it is probably for people healthier than me, or younger than me, or with more money to spend. I want you to hear me clearly. This next part was built for you, not around you, for you. Because here is the truth about this method. It is very likely the single most affordable health trick I have ever come across, and it asks almost nothing of your body. You do not need to bend. You do not need to stand. You do not need strength in your hands. You do not need to buy one single new gadget if you do not want to. Let me give you the versions, from the cheapest possible all the way up, so you can pick the one that fits your life exactly as it is tonight. The cheapest version costs nothing at all. A pair of ordinary socks. Loose ones, never tight, because tight socks squeeze those little blood vessels shut and defeat the whole purpose. You want soft, roomy socks that trap warmth without pinching. You put them on about half an hour before you plan to sleep, not at the very last second. That waiting time matters, and I will explain why in a moment. If you already own a pair of thick socks, you already own the entire method, $0. If you find yourself wanting to go deeper into this kind of recovered wisdom, the old methods, the buried records, the practical knowledge that got quietly taken from ordinary people, I have put a great deal of it together in a book called Start Smart. And, for those who want to go further, Deeper Roots and the Complete System carry the investigation even further. You can find all of them linked in the description below, written the same way I talk to you here. No jargon, no products to sell, just the record laid out plainly so you can use it in the home and body you already have. But back to what made me angry enough to keep digging in the first place. The next version up is a hot water bottle, the old rubber kind, and you can find one for just a few dollars, sometimes less at a thrift store. You fill it with hot tap water or water from a kettle, never boiling, screw the top on tight, and set it down at the foot of the bed where your feet will rest. No lifting, no reaching, no strength required. You just let it sit there and do the work. That is the closest thing we have to my grandmother's brick, and it is honestly better, because it holds its warmth gently for a long time and it will not burn you if you are careful with the water temperature. And if reaching down to the foot of the bed is hard on your back, here is the trick within the trick. Warm your feet before you get into bed. Sit in your chair, put your feet up on a warm surface, or soak them for 10 minutes in a basin of comfortably warm water, and then dry them well and get into bed. The warming does not have to happen under the covers. It just has to happen shortly before you lie down. Your feet carry that opened, relaxed state into the bed with you. That foot soak, by the way, might be the gentlest version of all, and it is where the science gets exciting. So let me bring you at last to that record I have been promising. The place is Switzerland. The year is 1999. A team of researchers led by a scientist named Kurt Krejci, working in the field of chronobiology, which is simply the study of the body's clocks, ran a careful experiment on how the body prepares for sleep. And they published what they found in the journal Nature, which is one of the most respected and rigorously checked scientific journals on Earth. This was not a magazine tip. This was not a rumor. This was hard science, printed in 1999, and then left to gather dust while the rest of us kept buying sleeping pills. Here is what they discovered, and it lines up with my grandmother's brick so precisely that it gives me chills. They measured how warm people's hands and feet were compared to their core, and they found that the amount of warmth flowing out through the hands and feet was the single best physical predictor of how quickly a person fell asleep, not how tired they were, not how dark the room was, the heat leaving through the hands and feet. When those little radiators in the skin opened up and released warmth, sleep came fast. The researchers described this warming of the extremities as the strongest signal that the body was ready for sleep onset. Read that again in your mind. The strongest signal. Out of everything they measured, warm feet won. A brick wrapped in wool, understood at last by a laboratory in Switzerland almost 200 years after that household manual first wrote it down. When I found that study, I sat back in my chair and I thought about my grandmother heating that brick by the stove, night after night, never once knowing there was a Swiss laboratory that would one day prove her right. She did not have the journal. She did not have the word chronobiology. She just had the knowing, passed down from her mother, and the good sense to trust what worked. And somewhere between her generation and ours, that knowing got dropped. We traded it for products. We traded a free brick for a monthly electric bill. I decided I was going to test it properly. the way an ordinary person can, not the way a laboratory does. So for 2 weeks, I kept a little notebook by my bed. On the ordinary nights, cold feet, no help, I wrote down roughly how long it felt like I lay awake before drifting off. Some nights it was 40 minutes. Some nights it was well over an hour of just turning and sighing. Then for the second week, I warmed my feet properly. Loose socks and the hot water bottle, starting about 30 minutes before bed. And the difference in my own notebook was not small. Most nights I was gone in what felt like 15 or 20 minutes. A couple of nights I do not even remember my head being on the pillow long enough to think. Now my notebook is not a laboratory, I know that. But it matched the study so closely that I could not pretend it was coincidence. And it matched the old household manual. And it matched my grandmother. When a peasant's brick, a Victorian housekeeping book, a Swiss journal from 1999, and my own scribbled notebook all say the exact same thing, I stop calling it a coincidence and I start calling it the truth. But I told you the tension would keep climbing, and it does, because there is one more layer I have to give you, and it is the part almost nobody gets right. It is the reason some people try warming their feet, feel nothing, and give up. And it comes straight back to that word I used earlier, timing. Here is the mistake. Most folks, if they think of this at all, pull on socks at the very last second, at the same moment they turn off the light and lie down. And then they wonder why they are still awake. The problem is that opening those little radiators in your feet and letting your core actually cool down takes time. It is not instant. Your body needs roughly 20 to 30 minutes to warm the feet, open the vessels, release the heat, and lower the core temperature enough to tip you over into sleep. So the real method, the one hidden inside the method, is this. You warm your feet before you want to be asleep, not at the moment you want to be asleep. Half an hour early. You put the socks on, or set the bottle at your feet, or soak them and dry them, and then you let the machinery run while you read a little or sit quietly. By the time you settle in, the cooling has already begun, the door to sleep is already open, and you simply walk through it. That single detail, doing it early instead of at the last second, is what separates the people this works miracles for from the people who shrug and say it did nothing. The Swiss data showed the sleep came after the heat moved to the extremities and the core began to fall. You have to give that process its half hour. My grandmother knew that too, without knowing she knew it. She heated that brick and slid it in before we ever climbed into bed. The warmth was always waiting for us. She had the timing right 200 years before anyone printed the reason. Let me pull all of this together now, because this is the moment the whole case snaps shut, and I want you to hold it in your hands complete. The mystery was simple. Why did my grandmother warm our feet and not the rest of the bed? The answer runs from a wool sock at the bottom of a trunk, back through Victorian household manuals from the 1860s that promised rest follows quickly, back further to the brass bed warmers of the 1700s, and then forward again to a laboratory in Switzerland in 1999, where a scientist named Kurt Krejci published in the journal Nature the discovery that the warmth leaving your hands and feet is the strongest signal your body gives that it is ready to sleep. Your feet are radiators. Warming them opens those radiators. Your core cools. Sleep comes. And it comes fastest when you give it that 30-minute head start. That is the whole secret. That is the thing that had been sitting in plain sight for over 20 years. In a journal anyone could read, describing something our great-grandmothers did every single night for free. It was never lost because it stopped working. It was lost because a warm brick does not come with a monthly payment, and nobody makes a living reminding you of the things you can do for nothing. And you can do this one tonight. Not next week after you buy something, not after a doctor's visit, not after you save up. Tonight, with a pair of loose socks you almost certainly already own, or a few dollars for a rubber bottle if you want the deluxe version. It costs almost nothing. It asks almost nothing of your body. And it does the one thing all those expensive gadgets promised and so rarely delivered. It helps you fall asleep like you did when you were young. I want to be honest with you about why this matters so much to me, beyond just the sleep. When you reach our age, you get told over and over in 100 small ways that decline is simply your lot now. That bad sleep is just aging. That being cold is just aging. that the answer to every discomfort is another product, another prescription, another subscription draining your account, and I have come to believe that a great deal of that is simply not true. A great deal of it is knowledge that got buried because free answers do not sell. So what you really recovered tonight is bigger than a sleep trick. You recovered proof that the old ways were often right, that your grandmother knew things worth knowing, and that you are not powerless in your own body and your own home. You picked up a piece of practical wisdom that somebody, somewhere, quietly let you forget. And you can hand it to your children and your neighbors, and it will cost all of you nothing but a warm pair of socks and half an hour of patience. That is the kind of person you are, if you have watched me all the way to here. You are someone who does not just swallow the easy answer. You are someone who notices when a thing does not add up, and who keeps asking why even when the world would rather you stop asking. That stubborn streak is not a flaw. It is the most valuable thing you own. It is the thing that gets records like this one dug back up. Now I want to hear from you, and I mean this, because this audience of ours is quiet, and I have to ask you directly. Think back to the warming pan, the brass one with the long handle, or the heated brick wrapped in wool. Did your mother or your grandmother do something like that in your home when you were small? A warm brick? A hot stone? A flat iron in flannel at the foot of the bed? Tell me in the comments what your family used and where you grew up, because I am collecting these old warming habits and I have a feeling there are versions out there I have never heard of. And while you are down there, tell me where in the world you are watching from tonight. I love seeing how far these forgotten methods travel. If tonight's investigation gave you something real, something you can actually use, then come stand with the rest of us who are taking this knowledge back one buried record at a time. We are not here to support a channel. We are here to recover the practical wisdom that was quietly taken from ordinary people like us, and to put it back to work in the homes and bodies we already have, because I have already pulled the next thread. It is about something you keep in your kitchen right now, something almost every one of us throws away without a second thought, and an old record that says it may be worth more for your aching joints than half the products on the pharmacy shelf. I found the source. I am already testing it. And when I have the answer, I will bring it straight to you. Until then, warm your feet half an hour before you lie down tonight, and see for yourself what my grandmother knew all along. Sleep well. You have earned it. Before you go, one thing. Tonight you got the story and the idea. But inside the Wise Living Circle, I walk you through the full feet-warming sleep method, step by step. In there, you can ask me your own question, and I answer you myself. A real person, not a machine. You won't be alone. Just point your phone's camera at the code on the screen, and you can cancel any time.